Welcome to Visual Debates. Our guest today is, as usual, a very special guest. Our guest today is Ofer Neiman. Ofer Neiman is an Israeli citizen and a member of the group Boycott within a group of people, Israeli people inside Israel that support boycott and BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Ofer, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me here, Sam.
Okay, just to get this straight, you are an Israeli citizen, right? And you are now
A
in
Jewish Israeli citizen, yeah.
amazing. And you are now in Israel. You are filming this from inside.
Jerusalem, West Jerusalem.
What was your train of thoughts? How did you end up supporting BDS?
So there's always been a small minority of anti-Zionist Jewish Israeli citizens here in Israel. We can say some more later about the history of these groups. And for me personally, I grew up seeing the Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, which was a direct occupation at the time. And this began a very gradual process for me, which took me to the place I'm at right now. So I started as a so-called liberal Zionist or a left-wing Zionist, someone who thinks that as a child, basically, that overall the Zionist project is reasonable, but the 67 occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip is wrong. And I think it was also easier for me because in my part of Israeli society, which is more secular and liberal, it's more natural to be, or was more natural to be, critical of Likud and the settlers and the nominal right wing in Israel because they are the other political force. And there's also an internal struggle for hegemony within Israeli society, and they are the adversary in this internal struggle, and they are seen as the side that is more responsible for the 67 occupation. We can say more about that because it's not entirely true. The Israeli Labor Party historically has certainly supported parts of the settlement project. We can say more about that. But overall, if you look at the Hebron settlers and the settlers, the so-called crazy settlers you see on television, these are usually nominal right-wing people, religious right-wing people. So it's a bit easier to be against that. And I've always been supportive of human rights in general. I've been a member, an active member of Amnesty International. So my process was very gradual. I actually started out in Peace Now, which is a liberal Zionist so-called peace group. I don't have very positive things to say about them now, of course, but I had to educate myself because I had no one to educate me politically. In terms of my parents, they were liberal left wingers, you can say, but not really knowledgeable about the foundations of Zionism. And on top of that, my family on my mother's side, they are Holocaust survivors who came to Palestine or Israel in 1949 after the Nakba. So I think that this combination of not having a very good understanding of history here, of Zionism, and being a victim of a genocide in Europe, or the survivors or the descendants of survivors of a genocide, makes it more difficult for people to understand what's happening here, or even if they understand, do something in the positive direction towards equality and freedom and justice. So again, I had to educate myself. I did serve in the Israeli military, although I did not want to serve in the occupied territories. And for various reasons, my service was in Tel Aviv. But only later did I actually come to the conclusion. I joined a group called Yesh Gvul. Yesh Gvul means there is a limit geographically and morally that supports Israeli refusers. And I became a refuser and as a reservist, long after my 3-year term as a conscript soldier. As a reservist, I became a refuser and then I was kicked out of the military. Everything here is more conservative politically. I can give an example related to this refuser movement. In most places across the world, when you see military refusers, they just say, I refuse to serve in the military, period. I mean, that was the case predominantly in the US for Vietnam War refusers. They were saying, I will not serve in the US military, period. Here, everything is more conservative. So historically, the refusal movement in Israel was about selective refusal. People were saying, I'm willing to serve in the Israeli army, but I will not serve in Lebanon, or I will not serve in the occupied territories, in the West Bank and Gaza. So I think this sort of gives you an example of how things are politically here. And my own journey, so you can say in general, reading B'Tselem reports about the occupation, being a general supporter of human rights, Amnesty International, going to Peace Now demonstrations, later on joining Yesh Gvul, which is a much better option because they support refusal, unlike Peace Now. But I was always under the impression that we don't have a sufficient number of dissidents here to change things from within. And also looking at the fact that Israel has such strong support across the world, especially in the West. For example, Christian evangelicals in the US, tens of millions of Christian evangelicals who support the US. And of course, lots of Jewish Zionist supporters of Israel as well. And various political elites that support Israel, the German government, the German political elites, arms industries. So I always had the feeling that we need an international struggle. And when the BDS movement emerged and when an Israeli group was formed here in 2009, I joined that group, Boycott from Within, Israeli citizens who support the BDS campaign, which is led by Palestinian civil society. We're not the leaders of the campaign. We support the campaign. We can say more about that. And we work with our Palestinian partners. And in terms of Zionism, I think that if you go through such a political process, you understand that the roots are, of course, they go way back before 1967. So you learn more about the Nakba, 1948. You learn more about Zionism, the history of Zionism, the early history, Zionism's general character as a European colonial movement. And it becomes much more natural to oppose Zionism in its entirety. And I should be more precise here. I think I should say mainstream Zionism. There have always been alternative versions of Zionism, fringe, marginal, groups and people who understood that there was dispossession and colonialism going on against the Palestinians, and their vision was a bit different. I mean, for example, saying, no, we should not necessarily have a Jewish state here. We can have a binational state, and we should not dispossess, Palestinian fellaheen, the peasants, the farmers, drive them off the land. But these are very small elements. So I can accept these small movements, but mainstream Zionism is a violent racist movement with a very clear agenda. A Jewish state, Jewish majority, lots of talk about demographics, So it becomes, as you learn and you go through things and you see reality on the ground here, it's much easier to become anti-Zionist.
Sorry to
Okay.
cut the train of thoughts, but to make things clear here, what is the difference between a left-wing Israeli, a Labour Party Israeli, and an anti-Zionist? Because this line is blurred sometimes here and they are not very clear.
Yeah, of course. So left and right Zionist, I mean, left Zionist, if you like, such as the Israeli Labor Party, it's not really left because historically the Labor Party is the party that perpetrated the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 1948. And they have a Jewish majority agenda. This is David Ben-Gurion's party, right? So but within Zionism, left Zionism is more secular, perhaps a bit more socialist. But if it's socialism for Jews only, very ethnic, racist form of socialism, and perhaps a bit more moderate when it comes to some territorial agreements, concessions. For example, if at the time in 1978, I think, during peace talks with Egypt, most but not all of Likud supported the agreement, pretty much all members of Knesset for the Labor Party supported the agreement. And the Oslo process that was done by the Labor Party. So in some ways, which are not really important, I mean, I would say that's not the essence. They're willing to compromise on perhaps on some territory and some minor arrangements towards the Palestinians, but they are racist. And if you look at public opinion polls here, yeah, overall support for violence for the Gaza genocide is higher among people who are more who self-identify as religious and or right-wing, but it's very high. It's being very high among Labor Party supporters as well.
Okay, so
And
thank you
and
for
so
the.
so anti-Zionist, if I can only add,
Yep.
so of course anti-Zionist, we see the racism in all of those elements across the Zionist spectrum, and we're opposed to all of that.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying this. So, and thank you also for mentioning the movement that is now in Israel. So today we are filming on Monday, the 2nd of September, and there has been a lot of demonstrations yesterday and the strike today. What's going on? And can you also tell us what is your stance regarding this movement?
So, as we know, the recent major incident in terms of what Israelis care about, most of them don't care about the genocide, is the fact that the bodies of 6 Israeli captives were rescued, brought back from Gaza, and this seems to have been a trigger for a major protest in Israel. There had been some growing support for a deal with Hamas, meaning ceasefire, some sort of exchange deal, Israel withdrawing from Gaza. But Netanyahu and most of his coalition partners are opposed to that. But this recent incident has brought hundreds of thousands of people out into the streets. And yes, most of them would be more towards Labor Party, liberal Zionists or so-called left Zionists, but also lots of centrists and some right-wing people as well. We're saying our first priority right now, first and foremost, should be saving the Israeli captives, and we should accept the deal. And I think the fact that the bodies, that this time you have 6 people and all of them young, and some of them have had a high public profile. For example, Hirsch Goldberg was a US citizen, and he also lost his arm during the attack, the Hamas attack on October 7th, and then he was being held as a captive. I think he had a pretty high public profile, and the fact that he's one of the people who died, and we don't know the circumstances exactly. It could have been a failed rescue operation. We don't know. But I think that lots of Israelis understand that military action is not going to bring the captives back. And there has been growing resentment towards Netanyahu because it's absolutely clear that he will do whatever he can to prevent a deal because he his survival, political survival as a prime minister, depends on his right-wing coalition partners, who are absolute fascist genociders, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and they're totally opposed to any withdrawal from Gaza. In fact, they want to resettle Gaza and drive out the Palestinians. I think it's quite clear that Netanyahu is also interested in driving out the Palestinians, but his coalition partners, the messianic religious right wingers, they want to start colonizing, resettling Gaza on top of that. So he wants to maintain his coalition, and he will do whatever he can to prevent a deal. In addition to that, if his government falls and if he falls politically, he's also facing charges, corruption charges in Israel. He may go to prison. And he's also facing potential arrest warrants by the ICC in The Hague on top of that. So he has a very strong incentive in staying in power and appeasing his coalition partners. And Israelis who understand that he will do whatever he can to kill the deal are now fed up. It seems like tension have been growing sort of behind the scenes. But now all of a sudden, if typical demonstrations in favor of a deal, for example, in Jerusalem, we had a few hundred people, and maybe 100 of them were also anti-war and anti-genocide. Yesterday in Tel Aviv, more than 100,000 apparently. People, my friends from Tel Aviv are telling me that this was the largest demonstration they have been to, and I don't think this is going to go away. By now, it's pretty much like the mass protest that we had earlier last year, 2023, against the judicial reform when the Netanyahu government was trying to push forward with an anti-democratic judicial reform. And again, when I say anti-democratic, Israel is not a democracy; it's an apartheid state. But what Netanyahu and his coalition partners wanted to do is actually weaken the Israeli Supreme Court and create a political structure which would be even more authoritarian towards Jews and more conservative. And there was mass protest against that. And overall, that protest was successful. They managed to stop the reform. And I think that now the protest again is stronger than Netanyahu, but he will not give up. So this is even more of a matter of life and death for him. So we're going to see a major political struggle here within Israel.
Do you join these demonstrations?
So I have mixed feelings about these demonstrations because these masses are protesting for a deal, and right now a deal means a ceasefire and stopping the Gaza genocide, and I support that. But they're not protesting the Gaza genocide, and some of them are saying, let's cut a deal with Hamas, let's bring back the hostages, and maybe we can continue the war later. There's also this mindset, which I absolutely reject. So I don't trust these people politically and morally. And if I go to these demonstrations, I try to join a much smaller block of people, Israeli activists, who support the deal but are also opposed to the war, with very, very explicit anti-war chants. Stop the war, and Gazan suffering matters too, or stop the genocide. I feel more comfortable being a part of that small block within the larger demonstration for a deal.
Okay. So back to BDS. BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And you are an Israeli citizen. This means you are actually going to be affected if a boycott is applied. Not only you, other innocent people who belong to the same small block that you have mentioned. So how come you think in that way? What is the rationale here?
So the alternative to international pressure to dismantle the whole apartheid regime here and definitely, stop the genocide and other very urgent matters of Israeli violence, the alternative to BDS and international pressure is simply more bloodshed. And this is going to harm Israelis too. So yes, BDS affects all of us living here. But just as there were white dissidents in apartheid South Africa supporting the boycott movement at the time against apartheid South Africa in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. So we have our own group of Israeli citizens who feel the same way. And it's absolutely clear. It's either international pressure, everything from ICC arrest warrants and BDS, international companies pulling out of Israel, or more bloodshed. Of course, Palestinians are impacted by the violence here much more than Israelis, but Israelis are paying the price too. And I think that more and more Israelis will be paying the price. It seems that suicide bombings may be back on the agenda for Palestinian resistance groups. This means Israeli citizens, civilians being killed, in the middle of the street, on buses, in restaurants. I don't want that to happen. I don't want people to die. So what we can offer is a democratic, non-violent, human rights-based, international law-based struggle, which is an alternative to violence. And BDS is inherently an anti-racist movement. Our Palestinian partners, it's basically hundreds of Palestinian civil society groups. It's always very, very important for them to stress that they are opposed to racism. This includes, of course, anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, all forms of racism. So the BDS movement is a movement for equality in human rights, and it's inherently an anti-racist movement, and the alternative to horrific bloodshed here.
Okay. What about academia? We are an academic institute here, and the claim is that Israeli academia is isolated from all what happens, and basically we shouldn't blame an innocent scientist, or they should not be affected by whatever a fascist government is doing, for example. To what extent is this true?
So first of all, the BDS campaign has guidelines. The academic BDS campaign has guidelines, and according to these guidelines, an individual member of Israeli academia can go abroad on sabbatical leave, take part in conferences, have their papers published. The BDS campaign, the academic BDS campaign, targets institutional cooperation with Israeli universities. So this means, for example, that the campaign, the BDS movement, calls on researchers, international researchers, not to participate in conferences being held at Israeli universities, because that's institutional cooperation with Israeli universities. But an individual member of Israeli academia can travel abroad, go to conferences. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, of course, it does restrict Israeli academia, but again, it's nuanced. There is a lot of freedom granted to individual members of Israeli academia. And then we also have to talk about the complicity of Israeli academia. Israeli universities are highly complicit in occupation, apartheid, militarism, genocide. For example, developing arms in cooperation with Israeli military industries, including drones, weapons being used in Gaza. Um, the Gaza Strip over the years has been a sort of lab, experimental lab for Israeli weapons, and then the Israeli industries can say, okay, these weapons are battle tested, and they can sell these systems for a fortune to various governments, regimes, all kinds of dirty agents abroad, of course, including lots of Western governments who think of themselves as democracies, but when it comes to Israel and Palestine, they support a genocide. And Israeli academia is highly complicit in all of this. On top of that, Israeli academia, the presidents of Israeli academia have been running a witch hunting campaign against the small number of dissidents within Israeli academia. One name that comes to mind is Dr. Nadira Shalhoub-Kevokian. She's not Jewish Israeli. I think she's Armenian Palestinian. Nadira Shalhoub-Kevokian, at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who has been persecuted, absolutely persecuted, hounded by the Hebrew University for criticizing Israeli apartheid and genocide, with all kinds of incitement, legal threats against her, which have also led to an arrest by the Israeli police under Minister Ben-Gvir. She spent, I think, 24 hours in detention a few months ago. This is very serious stuff. So the Israeli universities, the heads of Israeli universities are persecuting, harassing, threatening a small number of dissidents, good folks within Israeli academia. And on top of that, Israeli academia is also highly engaged in propaganda efforts for Israel, all kinds of propaganda efforts, for example, sending students abroad on various PR, public relations missions, and instructing them, this is how you can help boost Israel's image as students, all kinds of events taking place within universities, organizing projects to promote Israeli public relations efforts abroad. So Israeli universities are highly complicit.
Having these opinions, what is your experience in Israel? Does it make a difference or it does not? It's a very similar thing to being part of the Labour Party, for example.
So, what does it mean in terms of Israeli society? My interactions with other people here, if it's a problem. So this depends on the individual. In my case, not so much. I mean, my friends are left-leaning and pro-human rights, and many of them are activists like me. But for some people, it can be a huge problem. They may have problems with their families. They may have problems at their workplace. In some cases, people have lost jobs. So it really, really depends. But I do know quite a few people who have had social problems, professional problems, because of their views being similar to mine. Personally, not so much for me, but I do face, I certainly receive some death threats on social media and harassment on a regular basis. And it's not always easy, of course. Yeah, but I mean, it happens to so many people. It happens even to pro-Palestine activists in the US. I mean, I look at what some of these people are going through. Palestine solidarity activists in the US, many of them, face a lot of harassment and threats too.
Can you give us some examples about the activities that you have in Boycott from Within?
So, I mean, one natural question is, I mean, are you boycotting Israeli products because you support the BDS campaign? So, I mean, obviously we have to buy basic stuff like bread and tomatoes and things like that. And Israeli citizens are not asked to boycott Israel. Israeli citizens are asked to express their solidarity with the campaign and promote it. And that's what we do. As a consumer here, I can boycott settlement products, products made in settlements in the West Bank. But the main thing for Israeli BDS supporters is to promote BDS to legitimize the campaign. For example, if an international artist is booked to perform in Israel, then our group is likely to send a letter to that artist explaining the situation here, that there's an ongoing crisis here of occupation, apartheid, genocide, and that, based on a similar campaign to end apartheid in South Africa, we're asking artists not to play here. And once again, there are some smaller venues which are not boycottable, independent clubs, for example, that support human rights here, that are anti-apartheid. But the major concerts here are held in places which are, like public places, football stadiums, and so on, which are, owned or operated by municipalities, basically by Israeli institutions. And if it's a big name coming to play here, so in that case, the concert is going to be boycottable, and we'll probably try to contact that artist and explain why they should not perform in Israel until apartheid and, of course, nowadays genocide and everything come to an end.
Did you manage to cancel a concert or change it?
So overall, it's harder to say if a specific letter by Israeli activists was the main reason for a cancellation, but the BDS movement overall has been quite successful in getting artists not to perform in Israel, either cancel their concerts in Israel or just pledge not to perform in Israel. Lots of names, but one name that comes to mind, Elvis Costello, a very famous musician, started out as sort of the alternative punk rock musician, later moved on to jazz, a very big name. So Elvis Costello was supposed to play here more than 10 years ago. There was a BDS campaign trying to explain the situation here and get him to cancel his concert. And he did. And he said something along the lines of sometimes silence means more than the music, or silence is louder than any music. So he chose to be silent in the sense of canceling his performance here in Israel. And we have quite a few statements from various artists over the years who have canceled or pledged not to perform here in Israel. And these statements are quite powerful.
Okay, so one last question. Sorry, we took a lot of your time. Thank you very much. What do you think is the right direction? What do you think is the solution?
So there's this ongoing debate, 2 states versus 1 state, and I try not to focus too much on that because I think that right now the main goal is to change the balance of power or the imbalance of power. Israel has so much power here. The Palestinians have very little power, and we need to change that. We need to empower Palestinians. We need to apply pressure, legal, diplomatic, financial, economic, whatever, political, moral, against Israel. And I think that if we change the balance of power, all kinds of alternatives and political frameworks will emerge. I don't have a strong view here. I mean, as long as there is some sort of framework that is based on equal human rights, no privileges on an ethnic or religious basis, and if this is the popular option, I'll probably support that. I lean more towards a one-state solution because the two-state solution or so-called two-state solution that is on the agenda in terms of the US, the Quartet, the United Nations, doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't even solve the problem in terms of full Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank. I mean, in terms of the Israeli proposals and even the US, the so-called mediation efforts by the US, It's never about Israel removing all of the settlements. And on top of that, it doesn't solve the problem of basic inequality of Palestinian citizens of Israel within the 67 borders or the 1949 borders. Those who are not in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, those who are citizens of Israel. Israel is a racist state, and it's also racist against its Palestinian citizens. And these two-state solution frameworks do not address this problem, and they hardly address the Nakba, or the plight of the Palestinian refugees, the right of return. In principle, you could have some alternative two-state framework which does address all of these issues. And if most people here accept this, then I'll go along. But if you want to solve the problems here, it's more natural to lean towards a one-state solution, because a one-state solution has a more natural way of addressing all the problems here. Inequality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and the right of return, and of course the 67 occupation. But even within the one-state solution framework, there are various options. I mean, binational state, or a democratic one person, one vote state. I don't have a strong opinion on that. I mean, as long as it's based on equality in human rights. But for now, I think that it's good to come up with various plans and proposals and maps and blueprints for a future solution. But I think that our focus should be on resistance by BDS and International Criminal Court to force Israeli decision makers and Israeli society to understand that this Israel has no future, that Israel and Israelis have no power, no political power, nowadays perhaps not even military power, to impose their will on reality or on the Middle East, and that they must accept some sort of major change. This is the thing that we should be working on through pressure. And for me, my main option is BDS.
So, first, thank you very much. You mentioned inequality with Palestinian citizens within Israel. You mean those who have an Israeli passport, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of this inequality?
So one of the examples that comes to mind is something that happened in 2018 in the Galilee, northern part of Israel. And the Galilee has a fairly large Palestinian population, I think more than 50%. The reason is that this is one of the only areas within 67 borders Israel where there was no full ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the Nakba in 1948. The local commander was sort of reluctant to do that. That's I can give some more facts about that if you're interested. But the fact of the matter is that the Galilee is inhabited by hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. In 2018, a liberal community, an affluent, rich community, upper middle class Jewish community in the Galilee called Kfar Vradim, Village of the Roses. Right, I think you can see the Arabic similarity as well here. Vradim, Vered, Ward. So this nice community with a nice name and nice liberal people, they don't vote for Likud, most of them, certainly not for Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, decided to go for an expansion, to expand the community and to issue various tenders, proposals for people to bid on the option of building their own home in the expansion, in the expanded part of Kfar Vradim. And when they opened the envelopes to see who actually was doing the bidding and who won, they saw that most of the people who won were Palestinian citizens of Israel. And the thing is, I mean, it's quite costly to live in such a community. You need cars, and even 2 cars, but there are quite a few affluent Palestinian citizens of Israel, doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, and these people can afford to buy a nice house in a nice community. But the head of the council, the community, they canceled the whole project because the people who won actually this bid were Palestinian, and they got away with it. I mean, imagine. I don't know. Imagine a community, a town somewhere in California, doing that, and then it turns out that most of the people who actually won this bidding process are black, and then they're going to say, and this community is historically white, and then they say, oh, we're just going to cancel the whole thing, and then the they will either say we want to remain as a white majority community or something else. We don't want to change our culture, some coded language. In this case, they may say we want to preserve Kfar Vladim as a Zionist community. But the thing is, they got away with it. I don't see anyone getting away with it in California. I think it would be anti-constitutional. They would face a huge lawsuit for discrimination and racism. But here in Israel, it's possible. So they canceled the whole thing, and because they didn't want to have Palestinians living in the community. And this is a liberal, upper middle class, secular community in Israel. Imagine that. So I think this gives you an example of the state of mind here, and also the discrimination that people and institutions are able to get away with here. But in addition, there's so much racism here. If you're a Palestinian citizen of Israel and you're flying in and out of the Israeli airport, Ben Gurion Airport, what you go through during so-called security checks is much different from what I would go through. Sometimes it takes hours. They go through all their stuff, their socks, their phone, everything. Major harassment, all kinds of ways in which Palestinian citizens of Israel suffer from discrimination here. Of course, there's also a lot of incitement against them, political incitement and harassment. Yesterday, there was a football match between a team from Sahnin, which is a Palestinian community in the Galilee, and Hapoel Beersheba. Nowadays, it's a Jewish Israeli town. Before the Nakba, there were quite a few Palestinians living there. So there was a football match yesterday, and the organizers decided to play the national anthem, which doesn't mention Palestinians at all. So the Palestinian fans turned their back rather than facing the flag during the playing of the anthem. And in response, Hapoel Beersheva fans, assaulted them with clubs and sticks, and the police did almost nothing. And if you look at Israeli media today, it's pretty much everything is against the fans. They are traitors, fifth columnists. They are the Sahnin fans. Nothing about the real violence coming from Hapoel Beersheva fans. And so I think these are a few examples of discrimination and racism here against Palestinian citizens.
Okay, we can stop here. I'll just ask you one last question. What do you think we should do here as an academic institution and as individuals? And with that, we can just finish.
So I think people across the world should try to join and support the BDS campaign. Follow the BDS movement, follow them on social media, their action alerts, calls to action, and see how they can help. And usually there are things. So if you're based in Barcelona, for example, there are a lot of things to be done locally in Barcelona because we know that there are also some political forces that support Israel, unfortunately, in Barcelona. So there are things to be done locally. For example, that the city council of Barcelona, especially under Mayor Colau at the time, certainly did something such as cutting ties with Tel Aviv, right? That's a major BDS campaign, a local campaign. And then you can join a national campaign. For example, if there's a general Spanish state campaign to stop military cooperation between the Spanish government and Israel, arms sales, for example, that would be another direction. And then you can also follow various international calls. I mean, even if someone is based in Barcelona, they can still contact a U.S. artist, an American artist who is scheduled to play in Israel, and ask that artist to cancel their performance, because we need all the pressure we can build for such international campaigns.
Ofer, thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for
Thanks
your
for having
insights.
me.
Good luck with what you do, and hope we meet sometime in the future in better circumstances.
I really hope so.
Thank you very much.